physiological standpoint, whether you're sending love or receiving, it's the same.
Today, we are joined by Tim Desmond, a distinguished faculty scholar at Antioch University, student of the legendary Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, and author of the eye-catching title, How to Stay Human in a Fact-Up World.
Like, you can train your mind to be more alert. You can train your mind to be more loving. You can train your mind to be less anxious, less fearful, more open, more curious. Whatever quality of mind you want, you can find ways to train yourself.
Tim's story is as relatable as it is inspiring. Growing up as an angry and lost kid, navigating life through the lens of suffering, and ultimately finding a path toward compassion and inner transformation.
If you asked your fear, like, what are you wishing? Being able to see the wish that is at the root of your fear, then you can see its nature. The mind is like a garden in which there are infinite seeds of every possible mental formation. The seed of happiness, fear, of confidence, of doubt, all of those seeds are dormant in the soil. The conditions, the weather, determines what seed is going to manifest.
In this episode, Tim dives deep into the essence of self-compassion and how understanding and transforming your suffering can unlock a more authentic and connected life. He shares powerful insights on overcoming loneliness, finding mentorship, and training your mind like a muscle through meditation. Whether it's cultivating compassion or embracing your humanity, Tim's wisdom offers an antidote to the relentless cycle of self-doubt and burnout.
Every time a seed manifests in your mind, that seed gets stronger. By stronger, we mean it gets easier to manifest. When compassion and suffering come together, the result is healing.
Have you ever wondered what masculinity even is in the modern era? Are you ready to move beyond the macho bully or the soy boy archetypes? I'm Marc Azoulay, and this is the Men's Therapy Podcast. Together, we'll explore how neuroscience, Jungian psychology, and Buddhist philosophy can transform your life, your marriage, and your business. Are you ready to deep dive into the minds of men? Let's begin. Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm here with Tim Desmond. He has a really awesome resume. So he is currently a distinguished faculty scholar at Antioch University. He's trained with Thich Nhat Hanh, which is a world-famous meditation instructor. And he's written a number of books. One that I really enjoyed the title here is How to Stay Human in a Fucked Up World. So Tim, welcome to the show. I'm excited for the conversation we're going to have.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So we like to talk about your personal story in the beginning of this episode. So what got you into doing mental health work and doing research?
Yeah. Okay. So I grew up in Boston. I grew up the son of a single mom. She was an alcoholic, in recovery for my teenage years, but I ended up in college, as like a pretty kind of angry, lonely kid. Actually, I got really bad grades in high school and only got into college because of a sports scholarship. But I ended up in college and realized I didn't really deserve to be there. I hadn't studied, I hadn't really done anything in high school other than sports. And when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with this kind of gift that fell in my lap, I decided that I was interested in trying to make the world better. Ever since I was young, I think just like the kind of understanding of you're going to live at best, 90 or 100 years, and then you're gone. And what are you going to do with that? So I was really interested in people, trying to learn about people who had tried to make the world better. And in a political science class, one of the books that I was assigned was Peace is Every Step by Thich Nhat Hanh. Thich Nhat Hanh is a Vietnamese Buddhist teacher. He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Martin Luther King, and is just a really amazing teacher. And the thing when I read that book that hit me was I was really interested in different people who had tried to make the world better. And one of the things that Thich Nhat Hanh was saying is if you're trying to make the world better, you're trying to create a world with less suffering. And if you want to create a world with less suffering, one thing that you need to be able to do is learn how to suffer less. and that a lot of people who are like trying to engage in the world in like social or political ways are just like filled with suffering and anger and sort of and they're bringing that energy into everything that they do. And so it just seemed logical to me, like this idea of, if you're trying to make a better world, one thing that you need to learn how to do is be a better person. And so, like a lot of 19-year-olds that like run into something that really makes sense to them, I just dove in. Like I was just like, his teachings and those practices became really all I was about. And I spent really my whole 20s following Thich Nhat Hanh around the world on retreats. And so I would go and I would, engage in different kinds of, I would do different kinds of work, like protest movements or different things like that for a little while. And then I would come back to the monastery and spend time with Thich Nhat Hanh or spend time on retreats. And then after spending a lot of time studying Buddhism and kind of working on myself, I decided that I needed to get a job and figure out that part of my life. And the most logical thing for me was, okay, so how do I make sharing my meditation practice into work? And sort of clinical psychology became like the obvious path.
Yeah. So I want to ask you maybe just directly of like, what changed after that period of intensive practice? Like what changed internally in your life, externally? Because I have a lot of clients that are curious about meditation and they're like, what's it going to do? Right? What's it going to do for me?
So my favorite way of thinking about meditation is Richie Davidson, who's the neuroscientist who's worked with the Dalai Lama a lot. He talks about meditation as mental training, and that you can train your mind in whatever way you want. Like you can train your mind to be more alert. You can train your mind to be more loving. You can train your mind to be less anxious, less fearful, more open, more curious. Like whatever quality of mind you want, you can find ways to train yourself. And the reason that I think that thinking about meditation as mental training makes a lot of sense is because as soon as one of your clients is like, okay, I want to get into meditation, like, how do I do that? There, in Buddhism, sometimes we'll say there are 108,000 styles of meditation. So it's like, what am I going to do? And like, ultimately what it comes down to is, why are you interested in meditation and what are you hoping to gain from it? And specifically, like, what are the qualities of mind that you're trying to develop? So for me, I found a mentor kind of early on in my practice. Her name was Joanne Friday, and she ran a meditation group near where I went to college in Rhode Island. And the thing about Joanne Friday, she passed away a couple of years ago, but the thing about Joanne Friday is anybody who met her, like if you met Joanne Friday and you spent a little bit of time with her, you would come away being like, Joanne loves me as much as anyone in my life. Like you just get the feeling that she just likes you. And I was like, what a great way to be in the world. Like, what kind of impact do you want to have on the people that you interact with? What kind of impact do you want to have in the world? And like her ability to just like people, and to like, she was fearless. She was open. And she just liked people, and just like got a kick out of all of them. And I was like, I want to be like that. And so it was really about finding ways, like, how do you practice? How do you develop this in yourself? And like understanding that, yeah, however you want to show up in the world, you can do that and you can train yourself.
Yeah, what comes to mind, and it's something that a lot of my, male clients also struggle with, is just connection, right? Just like actual intimacy and actual connection. I don't want to tell you this, but some people, we live in our heads, we live in anxiety, we live in neurosis, maybe we live digitally, right? We live on a screen. But I think so many people have rarely actually experienced connection to another person and to the world. And it sounds like Joanne was a master in being able to connect with other people.
So much of connecting is fearlessness.
Okay.
And I think that people who are like withdrawn and who sort of hold people back or who don't engage, they don't see that they're not aware of the fear that's shaping their experience. Right? There's fear is present, but there's not awareness of fear is not present. Right? And so there's like, tightness, or I'm just like, oh, well, I don't really feel like doing that. One thing that Joanne told me that I've like leaned on a lot is, if you're not suffering at all, what that looks like is feeling like almost overwhelmed with joy and love for everyone that you meet. And if that's not how you're feeling, it's because there's suffering in you that's getting in the way of that. And so really for me, what it was learning how to be less controlled by the suffering that I was carrying around, that's like from my life, that I was conditioned by in my life. And then as I learned how to transform suffering, and I feel like for me, like ultimately, there's 108,000 ways of practicing meditation. But for me, what it ultimately comes down to, at least what I'm interested in, is the transformation of suffering into freedom. And as you're less controlled by suffering, then you can just, things seem like people seem more interesting. They seem like you want to get to know them, you like them more, and like it's just sort of like a natural extension of not being afraid, of not being protective, of like not worrying.
Yeah, I'm smiling as you're talking because it does mirror some of my journey with meditation. And I want to just, connect and unpack some of the suffering with you, right? This idea of the fear. When I was a handful of years into my practice, I became aware of this, right? And for me, it manifested as feeling like I'm running out of time, right? Feeling like I'm always being rushed, feeling like there's never enough time on planet Earth. This like kind of like anxiety, right? And just like, oh my God, I'm wasting this moment. I need to optimize. I need to whatever, just like go nonstop. And, meditation is like sitting still and shutting up and doing nothing. So feel very inefficient to that system, and I still carry that. It's not like I've cured myself of that, but like you're saying, I became aware of it. Whereas for up until that moment, that controlled me, right? I mean, that controlled most decisions I was making. It controlled the relationships I got into. It controlled the walls I put around my heart and my soul. And I think a lot of people carry that. And like you said, are not really aware because we don't take the time. And most of our systems are organized around not feeling that terror, and that existential dread. I'm curious if that relates to, with your story, what fears you found, or if there's other fears that you think people carry around with them that can turn into suffering.
Yeah, I mean, I think that ultimately, like the fear that you're talking about, it's like, it's all the fear of not being enough. Right? It's all the fear of not being good enough, not being lovable enough. Like, ultimately, when I want to teach people about relating to their suffering, one of the things that I really like to focus on is that your suffering always has a wish, right? fear, if you asked your fear, like, what are you wishing for? It's like, I'm wishing for safety. If you ask, like, or I'm wishing for connection, or I'm wishing for acceptance. And then it's like, like being able to see the wish that is at the root of your fear. Then you can see its nature. And that actually your fear is just, in Buddhist psychology, we say, like, all mind has Buddha nature. So like every mental condition, every mental factor, every manifestation of mind. So every fear has Buddha nature. And so Buddha nature is this, longing for peace and well-being. Which is another way of saying compassion. So in some ways, like, how can my fear, how can my anger, how can its nature be compassion? Well, what my fear is wishing, it is wishing for me to be safe. My anger is wishing for me to feel respected and, like, I'm treated well by the people that I interact with. And so when you find the wish that's at the nature of your suffering, then you can see it more clearly, like you can understand it. And so that fear, right? The fear of I'm not doing enough with my life. If we ask that fear, like, what's your wish? It's like, well, I wanna like live my life well. Like I wanna feel like I'm enough. And then it's like, oh,
I feel like I'm important.
I want to feel like I matter. I want to feel like I'm enough. And the thing is, so in Buddhism, we say all mental factors have Buddha nature, and they're conditioned by ignorance. So that fear, it's like, I want to feel like I'm enough. I want to feel like I matter. And I think, and then conditioned by ignorance, and I think that somehow optimizing and my productivity is going to make me matter. And it's like, no, you matter. You're good. Like, just if you can see that you're a living human being, like, you matter. Like your feelings, your needs, your life matters. And then you see that, and then you're not afraid. And then you're like, well, whether I'm productive or not, if I want to be productive, it's got to be for a different reason. And then you shift. For me, and we talk about masculinity, right? So for me, in terms of productivity, the type of productivity that comes from fear is, I would say, like an unmasculine productivity. And the type of productivity that comes from a desire to contribute to the world, to help. Like that, for me, that's like a masculine productivity. That's like, I don't need to be productive in order to feel like I matter. Like, I'm good there. But I recognize that I have something to offer and something that other people need, and I want to support others.
Yeah, and I liken it often to, like, like flailing in the dark, right? Like with an axe, it's trying to hit something, right? Out of fear, like maybe I'll matter, maybe I'll have an impact. Versus, I think, the practice of meditation, which is like turning on the lights and actually seeing what you're swinging at, and like you swing a lot less, but it's a lot more focused and it's a lot more efficient because it's not, you're not scared anymore. I want to unpack that with you because I think it's one of those like easier said than done things and I struggle with my clients of like, how do you really support someone in that process of, I often say it's like switching fuels, right? I think a lot of men are fueled, especially in their young years, by like anger, by fear, by spite, by like ego, right? Like pride. But then it burns out. I think for a lot of guys in their late 20s, early 30s, it starts to flame out, and it starts to really have a negative impact on their life, whether that looks like relationship failures or substance use or depression or anxiety or whatever, right? Handful of mental health issues. And then it's like, okay, now I got to switch. I got to switch to like a renewable energy. I got to switch to solar power. I've been running on kerosene, and now I got to switch to solar power. And it's lofty, right? I mean, the idea of like, I want to better the world. I want to, express my gifts. But I think for a lot of men, it's difficult to get there. So I'm curious, like, from your experience, what does like the switch look like, that liminal space between anger, fear, and then on the other side, compassion and love?
I mean, I think there's like, for a lot of people make shifts in their lives when they hit a bottom. And I think that's just like how it works. It's like, you have to see your way of like continuing along the path you're on isn't working. It's not going to get you where you want to go. And I think that a lot of young men, like myself included, when I was young, and a lot of my life, I'm going to say, we can say fueled by all these different feelings. I'm going to say conditioned by my suffering. The ways that I was interacting with the world were coming from like my suffering. And they were trying to, I was trying to find acceptance. I was trying to find love. I was trying to find value and worth and connection, and a place in the world. But in a way that was really conditioned by my suffering and my fear and my belief that I only matter if, I only matter if I'm winning. I only matter if I'm like, these models of really kind of conditional mattering. So I think that what has to happen is you have to see that all the things that you were trying for, like the wishes that are at the root of everything that you've been doing, that you're not going to get them. Like that you're actually going in the wrong direction. That like you're, one of the things in one of my books I write about, so you're driving in the highway and somebody cuts you off and you lean your head out the window and you scream a bunch of profanities at them. If you pause right there, what's the wish? Right? So what's going on there? It's like, well, what are you feeling? Well, I'm feeling really like that was really dangerous and really disrespectful, right? To cut me off. It's like, oh, okay. So you want to feel probably safer and more respected. Yeah, I want to feel safer and more respected. Okay, so what are you doing to try to create more safety and respect? I'm leaning my head out the window and cursing someone out. It's like, that's not going to create safety. That's not going to create respect. And what you start to see that the things that you are doing to seek respect, to seek connection, are having the opposite result. And you have to see it. And once you see it, and once you get to sort of there needs to be some grief. There needs to be like a little bit of hopelessness of like, wow, that didn't work. And I don't know what else to do. That was the best I could do, and it didn't work. And once you get there, now you're open to learning something new. Now you're open to learning how to first to like recognize like what's the outcome you're even hoping for. And when you see the outcome that you're hoping for, who are some actual people in the world that are getting that kind of response from others? Who are people that are treated like they matter? Who are people who have connection? Who are people who have the type of qualities of life that you're looking for? And how do they get them? And then once you, and I feel like that's that idea of like mentorship, because I feel like so often we're betrayed by our kind of masculine mythologies, you know, people who like act horribly and in real life they wouldn't really have anything in their lives, but they're these fictional characters that kind of like get everything that they want by acting in really antisocial ways. It's like, do you know any actual person who has the kind of life that you want? Because when you find that, then you realize that training yourself to not be so afraid, training yourself to have a sense of like comfort in your skin, that's when people respond.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff there. I'm just enjoying listening to you talk and kind of weaving through all these different themes. There's some really good things there. I'm trying to think about what to unpack next. I think where I wanted to focus in is a little bit on that grief moment, that rock bottom moment. I know in some spiritual communities, it's kind of called like the dark night of the soul, where it's like you have enough awareness to know that what you're doing isn't working. And in fact, it's very like counterproductive. Like you said, like, you know, you want safety and respect, but you're being disrespectful and unsafe in doing that. I think that was a wonderful example. And that grief part, I think, is tough for a lot of guys because just of the fact that you talked about, a lot of us don't have community. A lot of us don't have mentors. A lot of us didn't have parents that were able to help us get back on our feet or be like, hey, it's okay to pivot. Doesn't mean that you're, you know, a failure. It doesn't mean that your life sucks or whatever. So yeah, if you could expand a little bit more on that grief moment, because I think that's what brings a lot of guys to therapy, is kind of being in that rock bottom, whatever it may look like for them individually, you know?
Like like in a lot of ways, there's a lot of people that grew up the way that I grew up and didn't end up going in the direction that I did. And I feel like one of the things that I really feel grateful for was that my mom got into AA when I was relatively young. And so I grew up going to AA meetings in Boston and like hearing these people with like really fucking crazy stories about hitting bottom in their lives. And just being like, I remember like hanging out. I remember being like relatively young, like maybe like 10 or 11, being at an AA meeting. And there's this guy who's like half of his head's caved in. Like he has just like his skull has like a dent. And he talked about telling his story. And he's drooling a little bit. And he's telling this story about getting so drunk, getting in a fight and getting hit with a shovel. And like, the thing that I feel like really hit me about that whole community of AA is people who are like, they were like, you can see the strength in pivoting. Or just like, my life was going in a bad way. And eventually I saw that and now I'm doing something new, or I'm trying to do something different. And I think that really affected me. And I think that, I think that just having the idea, and I think that like whoever is listening to this now, finding more and more stories and more examples of people who shifted their lives. And seeing the strength that's there and seeing like what you can get. Like, I mean, for myself, I feel like everything good in my life, like all the connection, all the happiness and joy that I've experienced in my life, is a result of the the practices that I've learned and the people that I've learned from. And I feel extremely grateful for that. And it doesn't make me like a weaker person to like let go of things that are not working for me. I think that some of it, though, actually, is a self-doubt, is a sense of like a lack of self-efficacy, of like, well, what if I try to shift and I can't? And what I want to do is just like, that's a great place to start. Let's look at that fear. That is a fear in you. What is that fear wishing for? It's wishing for some confidence that if you try, you'll be able to build something in your life. And then if you're looking at that, what I'd want to do is like look at the data. Look for examples, like real examples. If you go to an AA meeting, it's a room full of people whose life was in a bad way and they shifted it. Like find examples and then you'll know that it's like, it's something you can do.
If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us to reach more men and inspire them to become the best versions of themselves. Thank you for your support. And now back to the show. How familiar you are with like kind of the men's work movement, especially in like the 90s and 2000s of like male initiation. And that's where my mind goes to as you're talking of like men needing to be initiated, to have that self-confidence, you know. I think traditionally it's like, you know, you're naked in the woods with a stick, hiking forever and fighting a mountain lion or whatever, right? But I think initiation can look like AA, right? I mean, I'm in recovery. I think that was a big part of my journey. I think it can look like intense spiritual practice, right? It can look like moving across the country or across the world. It can look like all kinds of things now. But I think as men, we need to like know that we can do stuff, you know, and know that we can learn and know that we can get stronger, know that we can improve. And that's one of the fears I have when I look out in the world is how easy it is to coast, I think now. And even though it's in some ways an easier life, I think we don't get that internal strength. You know, as like privileged dudes, we have to go seek challenge, right? I mean, I live in Colorado and I have to like, you know, go backpacking. I don't have to live in the woods, right? I don't have to find my food, but I create situations in which I have to have my survival needs be challenged. And I hope that more guys would do that to build exactly what you're talking about, that kind of like inner flame and that inner self-confidence of being like, oh, I can overcome challenge. Because I think that you can't take that for granted. You know, not everybody has that.
Yeah, I think maybe that's like another thing, like at least from like sports.
Yeah,
that I got
great
like
one too.
Yeah, of if you decide you want to do something, do it. I think that kind of inspiration is really important for people. I think there's like a commitment. The Buddha, like, you know, one way to think about the story of the Buddha is that he was traveling around listening to different teachers and learning him as much as he could. And then he just kind of got sick of it. And he's just like, I am still suffering. I'm learning all of these practices and I don't feel free in the way that I want to feel free. I'm going to sit down under this tree and I'm not getting up until I crack this open. Like, I'm not going to get up until I feel free in the way that I want to feel free. And he sat for 40 days. And he's just like, I'm not getting up. And there's stories from all sorts of traditions of that type of commitment of like, okay, yeah, I'm not going to take no for an answer. I'm going to figure this out. For me, I spent a lot of time on retreat. Like, especially in my 20s, I would be on retreat for at least 2 or 3 months out of the year. For, you know, basically until my son was 4. And And now still, I try to spend as much time on retreat as I can. And it's this, it's this experience of like, okay, so I want to make a change. Everything else, like it's the willingness to be like, you know what, everything else doesn't matter. What matters is what's actually important to me. I get to decide what's important to me, and I get to decide what's not.
Yeah. And you can orient your life around that. I think that's incredibly empowering. I do think it's a masculine trait, right? It's discipline, but I like the way you're talking about it because it's not discipline as like punishment, right? Or discipline as like going to jail or whatever, right? It's discipline from a place of commitment and a place of internal values of like, I'm going to dedicate my life to whatever my goal is or my practices or whatever I care about. And yeah, I just hope the listeners are listening to what you're saying, Tim, because again, we were talking a little bit about TikTok and social media right before we hopped on this. And it's like, I see so many guys have what I like to call kind of like the James Bond or like Jason Bourne fantasy, where they think they can be good at everything, right? Like James Bond can like, drive every vehicle. He can shoot every gun. He like speaks every language. He can gamble, is the hottest women, right? He can do everything. And I think in social media, we see experts in everything. You can just scroll on Instagram and you see like the most jacked dude you've ever seen. You see the most financially successful guy you've ever seen. You can see, the greatest Buddhist monk you've ever seen. And we get this idea that like, oh, I could maximize everything. I could be this James Bond character. Whereas when I hear you talk, I think it's like, you really can't. You could pick like one or two,
No.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to push back on that.
Yeah, do it.
That's greed. All of it. All of it. I would say all of that envy, all of that grasping, it comes from a place of hating yourself and insecurity. And you look, so it's like you look at Jason Bourne, you look at James Bond, and you're like, that person is lovable and I'm not. And you're wrong. Because, one is James Bond is a sociopath. And like, if you were to actually, Jason Bourne was, ruthlessly tortured in order to, to be so deeply disconnected from himself. And the thing is, it's like somehow what you think is that eradicating the humanity in you is going to make you acceptable or lovable or somehow is going to get you the whatever you think you're seeking. And what I want to say is, in those moments of fantasy, right? In those moments of wanting to be different than you are, I want you to ask yourself, why do I need to be different than I am? Now, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't be different. I'm saying, look at your motivation. Because if you're motivated by self-hatred, if you're motivated by these toxic forces, it's going to shape what you become. And if you put a ton of energy into becoming, really fit, and the whole time, it's this idea of, I won't feel this sense of worthlessness if I'm ripped enough. You're going to wake up in the morning really ripped and feeling just as worthless. Because you were trying to get blood from a stone. Like, that's not where worth comes from. And if you, getting a good shape is a fantastic thing to do. If you're doing it out of a sense of freedom. Out of a sense of like, here I am, I'm alive, I'm a human, and I want to use my body, and I want to take care of myself. But if you're doing it out of this sense of like a longing to that it's going to somehow solve a problem. It's like you're not going to find it. Like the only way to solve those problems is to ask yourself, like, what am I trying? Like, why am I trying to be different? What do I think that's going to do for me? And to realize that you have, like, what you're seeking is available to you, but in a really different.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. I mean, I agree, right? I think people get the like same thing but harder. So it's like you get shredded, you're still upset, you keep doing more exercise, you start taking steroids, you get body dysmorphia, and it's like you just do the same thing but harder. So I want to ask you, like you want to go down to the root, right? Like how do you do that? Say someone's like, okay, I want to get totally jacked, and it's because yes, I feel unlovable, I feel alone, I feel invisible, right? I mean, here's from guys all the time, right?
I feel like women like me. Like, I want to feel connection. Like, I'm lonely. And if I were jacked, I wouldn't be lonely. Those guys don't seem lonely. And it's like, dude, you're going to be lonely. So,
how do you work with
I mean,
loneliness?
I think that, yeah. The first thing is that, when you're afraid of being lonely, when you're afraid of being alone, it makes you rigid. It makes you unapproachable. If I think maybe the clearest way of talking about, like, I think there's two parts of working with loneliness, and one is like genuinely is like, how do I create connection in my life, and the other one is, how do I deal with the seed of loneliness that's in me. So for some people it's about building connection, and for some people it's like, I'm at a party and I have all these friends and I still feel lonely and unlovable. Right. So there's different ways to practice in those different situations, but I'll talk about both. I think I'm going to talk about the seed of loneliness. So in Buddhist psychology, one of the models of mind that we use is the idea that the mind is like a garden in which there are infinite seeds of every possible mental formation. The seed of happiness, of fear, of confidence, of doubt, all of those seeds are dormant in the soil. And the conditions, the weather, determines what seed is going to manifest. So let's say with the seed of loneliness. So let's say when you start off, the seed of loneliness only manifests when it's like below, when it's like 10 below zero. When it's that cold, loneliness arises in the mind. But one of the things that we say is that every time a seed manifests in your mind, that seed gets stronger. And by stronger, we mean it gets easier to manifest. We can describe this in a lot of different ways. We can describe it in the language of neuroscience, but in this sense, just to kind of stay with this analogy, if the seed of loneliness were to arise in you, 10,000 times because it keeps being that cold, then all of a sudden, now it doesn't need to be 10 below zero anymore. Now, if it just dips below 45, loneliness comes up. And then if it keeps coming up over and over again, now it's like anytime it's below 80, loneliness is going to be popping up. And now this, what we say is the seed of loneliness now dominates the garden of your mind. So when I look at the present, loneliness is arising in me. The feeling of loneliness is there, but what's the cause of it? Well, the cause is like something in the present is touching or watering that seed in me, but that seed is really strong and really easy to water. So how do we, once we recognize that the seed of loneliness in me is really strong, then one of the things that we need to do, so in Buddhist psychology, there is an alchemy practice that we say that when suffering is in touch with compassion, when compassion and suffering come together, the result is healing. And so how can I learn how to have compassion for the loneliness in me? And this is work. And the great part of this is that as you learn how to have compassion for the loneliness in yourself, it makes you able to respond in this open and present and supportive way to other people in your life who are lonely, and to actually connect with them. And so what it is, it's about getting in touch with the loneliness that's in you, bringing it up, letting it be there, and knowing that finding some place in you that knows, even though I feel lonely, I still matter. And it's okay for me to feel the way that I feel. And you can find that in yourself. You can have someone else that sort of like is like a symbol of that for you. A lot of the books that I've written are the sort of the practice of self-compassion, the practice of bringing compassion to the suffering that's in you. But what happens over time is over and over again, I learned how to get in touch with the suffering in me, the loneliness in me, and say like, it's okay that you're lonely. The reason that you're lonely is that you were isolated and nobody taught you how to connect tens of thousands of times in your life. And so that's grown. And that it makes sense. And it makes sense that you want connection. And just seeing the humanity that's there and finding compassion. And then as that seed of loneliness starts to shrink and transform, now you're talking with your son, you're talking with your friend who's feeling lonely, and you know how to be present. You know how to actually be there. And you're not scared of their suffering. In terms of finding the ability to actually find connection, if you're still isolated, it's a lot of it comes down to we teach people how to treat us. And if you can, it's also like if you can find it in yourself to like yourself, to connect with the humanity in you. If you can find it in yourself to see like everything that you wish, like you want connection, like you're a human man who has gifts, has weaknesses, and wants to connect with people. Like if you can find a way to like yourself as a complex person with strengths and weaknesses, and then what happens is you come into a new interaction and you're like, okay, I don't know if you're going to see what's cool about me, but if you don't, that's your problem, right? Like not everybody is going to see what's cool about you, but you know it's there. And if you know it's there, and you're not letting the other person define for you whether you're a cool person, you just make it easier for people to see what's cool in you. So I feel like both of those practices are really important.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And it's based on that Buddhist principle of kind of like letting go of the outcome, right? And just being with the present moment. Like you said, it's like if the goal of the conversation is not to convince someone that you're cool, then you have all this freedom to actually connect with them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and the thing, it's like because they may or may not. Like the reality is you will find, like, no matter how cool you are, there are people that are just that shut down and that are just that insecure, and you're not going to see it. And it's like, that doesn't matter. And that doesn't change who you are. It doesn't change your value.
So you mentioned kind of like find compassion within yourself.
Yeah.
Is there a practice that can help people evoke that? Because, you know, my mind goes, it is a very like body-based, somatic feeling thing. You can't just be like, I will now be compassionate cognitively, right? It's like, you got to evoke the feeling. How does someone get that? How does someone like really experience compassion?
There's a lot of different ways. So in Buddhist training, what we look for is what is the easiest way for you to get in touch with the sort of physiological response of compassion. I want to say, like, from a neuroscience standpoint, it's really clear that every mammal has what Jaak Panksepp, who's like the first affective, emotional neuroscientist, sort of emotion studying neuroscientist, he called the care circuit in the brain. It mediates oxytocin, it releases natural opiates, it mediates care responses. Everybody has it. How do you turn that on? When I'm working with people, often we'll start, especially if somebody doesn't have easy access to that response in them, we'll start with that. It's either going to be a sending practice or a receiving practice. So the sending practice goes like this. Picture something. It can be a puppy, it can be a baby, something that just brings up for you uncomplicated feelings of warmth and love. Sometimes we just call it puppy meditation. So yeah, it could be like a newborn baby, it could be like a puppy, it could be something. Just something that brings up uncomplicated warmth and love. And we're going to just exercise your care circuit and strengthen your capacity. And for some men, it's really your capacity to tolerate that feeling. For a lot of people, it's uncomfortable. Like when your oxytocin turns on, when that warmth, when the stone in your chest starts to relax, they actually find that scary. So it's like learning how to tolerate that feeling. So for some people, it's easier with that sort of like sending love. And for other people, it's easier to receive. So then if that doesn't click as well, then I'll say, okay, so picture somebody. It can be someone you've known, it can be a religious figure, an image from nature, whatever it is, that you feel could love and accept you just as you are right now. So maybe it's a grandparent, maybe it's a dog. So that you can have that feeling of feeling accepted in love. And what you'll notice, so I would say, some people really prefer sending, some people really prefer receiving, and some people can do both. If you can do both, what you'll notice is that they feel the same. But from a physiological standpoint, whether you're sending love or receiving love, it's the same. But if you want love in your life, one of the things that you need to train yourself in being able to do is to love. And if you can't if you're not comfortable with the feeling of love, then it's going to be hard to attract a lot of love into your life. So we learn how to love all the different parts of a human being, in myself and in others. We learn how to love the things like your virtues, and we learn how to love your suffering. And if I can do that for myself, I can do it with a partner, I can do it with my kids. But it's that very direct training. And then what we do is we start, and so just like working out, you start with what's easiest. So let's say for you, it's puppy meditation. You picture a puppy sitting in your lap. You can feel that love. And now we're going to make it a little harder. Now it's going to be, and so sometimes what I'll do is I'll say, okay, so now I want you to see if you can send that love to the puppy and yourself. For some people, that's too hard. And so we find like, just like how do we add just enough weight that you can still do it until we get to the point that I can look at my deepest, darkest secrets and feel like love and compassion.
Yeah. Yeah. What I like about the way you talk about Buddhism is that it's a very active process. Like you said, it's mental training, which I think just needs to be said over and over again, because I think there is this misconception of Buddhism being a very like passive practice, right? And just like having no needs, no wants, no feelings, like just taking everything, right? Versus, like you said, really nurturing positive mind states.
So what I like to say when I try to understand, so in Buddhism, when we talk about the Brahma Viharas, which are like the qualities that we're talking, like the core qualities in Buddhism. So one of them is compassion and one of them is equanimity. And when I try to talk about compassion and equanimity and how they go together, there's a couple things that I like to explain. So people in the mental health field, a lot of people when they start working in mental health, they have compassion with no equanimity. So that's like, I really care about my clients getting better. And if my client has a hard time, it kills me. And if you're in the field long enough that you burn out, we can say that someone who's sort of burned out, they have equanimity with no compassion. So your client comes in and they're in crisis and you're like, okay, what's new? And in Buddhism, what we're trying to cultivate is the ability to have compassion with equanimity. The ability to, and this is really like the sort of how to stay human in a fucked up world, like that the whole kind of thesis is how can we accept that the world is going to stay fucked up? Like, you're not going to see a blissful utopia in your lifetime. And how do you not allow that to make you cynical? How do you continue to care while you know that you're not going to end up with utopia? And what it is, it's basically this ability. And this is like, I want you to imagine like having this for your kids. I know that you're going to go through a lot of pain. There's no way around that. But I still wish that you wouldn't. Like, I still don't want you to. I'm okay with the fact that you will. Like, you're gonna get your heart broken. But I still wish that you wouldn't. And that's being a real human. That's somebody who, like, can see, yeah, there's pain in the world. And yet I still want you to be happy. And I feel like that's what we mean by compassion with equanimity. And it's this thing of like, I can want you to be well. I can want you to be free. I can want you to sort of like have love in your life, even though I know you're not always going to get it. And that it's sort of like I would say like a stronger, like anti-fragile type of compassion. It's like a compassion that isn't destroyed when things don't go your way.
Right. Again, it's free from outcome, right?
Yeah.
It's like no matter what outcome happens, the compassion is still there, Well, Tim, we're moving towards the end of our program here. You mentioned that last response of like, that's being a real human, right? It's balancing compassion and equanimity. I'm curious if you could leave our readers, what else makes a real human? How would you define that from your perspective?
Yeah. Every human wants wants to live in a God realm. In Buddhism, we talk about the idea of a God realm. So a God realm is a realm where you get everything you want as soon as you want. And when you ask yourself, like, what's driving you? Every human wants to be healthy, wants to be loved by everyone, wants to be respected by everyone. And those wishes everybody has, and that's part of what makes you alive. That's like the life in you is seeking health, love, connection, all these things. And you live in a world in which that's not going to happen a lot of the time. So for me, can you see the beauty of being a type of animal that lives in this world of pain and still wants for myself and for everybody else to be well and cared for? Like, that's appreciating what it is to be human.
Yeah, beautiful words. We're going to wrap up here. So, Tim, where can people find more about you online and pick up some of your books?
I'm not very online, but I do have a website that's timdesmond.net. You can find my books kind of anywhere that there's books. And yeah, you can look me up online, but I tend to try to steer clear of social media, so you normally won't find me there. But yeah, I have a therapy practice, and I'm always writing and often leading meditation retreats too.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for being on the show. I think you spoke to a lot of our listeners. We'll have all the links to your website as well as the Amazon links for your books if people want to check it out and learn more about you and what you do. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. This was really helpful. Do all the social media stuff, like, share, subscribe, all that. Pass it on to someone who you think needs to hear some of Tim's words. Someone that maybe struggles with self-compassion, or someone that is feeling that existential loneliness, or somebody that is doing more and more and more, but not really getting the results that they want. I think what Tim offered is a real antidote to that type of like cyclical, samsaric behavior of just kind of going over and over again in the same way. So yeah, share it with them, pass it along, and thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week, another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. And don't forget to visit menstherapy.online to learn more about the work that we are doing to support and inspire men. Until next time, keep moving forward.